Good morning from St. Anselm's Abbey. We are in the fourth week of Advent, just a couple of days before Christmas, and we're very lucky to have Father Michael with us here today. Well, good morning, Father Michael.
Good morning.
How are you doing today, and how are you doing in these last days of preparation for Christmas?
Well, I hope I'm doing well. I have no particular responsibilities about getting ready for Christmas, so I'm fairly peaceful.
Wonderful.
I don't have to do Christmas shopping
Wonderful.
or decorating anymore. I used to have to do a lot of that, but not anymore. So
good. So I very much look forward to our interview. If some of you have not yet sensed, you'll hear a lot of humor from Father Michael. So I'm definitely excited about that. But before we get to all the jokes, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? I know you're one of the few people in this community who come somewhat from this area. You're originally from Maryland, is that correct?
no, I've lived almost my whole life here in Washington. My family, really on both sides, has been in Washington, or the DC or Southern Maryland for, I think, 5 or 6 generations, probably on both sides. Now, my father did have two grandparents with whom he spent a lot of his time when he was growing up, were immigrants from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, Catholics from Northern Ireland. But my family largely has been from this area. As far as I can trace back 5 or 6 generations, in either in DC or in Southern Maryland or perhaps in Northern Virginia. So my background is completely in this area. I mean, I have spent some time other places, but mostly my whole life has been here.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you're not only a monk at the St. Anselm's Abbey, you also were a teacher here, a headmaster, I believe, and you are a graduate of St. Anselm's Abbey School.
I was a student here when it was a 4-year high school. I graduated from the school in 1956, and so I've been a student here. I returned after a couple of years of college and entered the monastic community. So I've been a member of the community since 1958, I think, and so I've been involved in St. Anselm's either school or monastery really my whole adult life, pretty much my whole adult life. There have been away for periods of work some other places, but for the most part I've been my whole adult life has been associated with St. Anselm's one way or another.
And it was only very recently that you decided to retire from the school, right?
Well, I retired, I guess, this past June from teaching in the school after teaching for 60 years. Now, not all 60 years were here, about 51 were here, and then 8 or 9 at 2 other places where I taught. But a total of 60 years of teaching, yeah.
And what was the subject that you taught?
Well, my subject is history, either U.S. history and modern European history, and politics. So my degree was in history and politics. So I've taught American history and American government, but I've also taught European history. Never taught ancient history, but I've taught modern European history. Those are the subjects I taught here. And when I was teaching in other places, I was teaching also U.S. government and politics.
And some of your education was done abroad as well, is that correct? You were in Toronto, I believe?
No, I was not, well, in North America, but not, well, no, wait a minute. I did spend a year studying at Cambridge. I got a degree, what is called a diploma in historical studies from Cambridge. So I spent a year living in England and studying at Cambridge. But then my PhD is from McGill in Montreal. So I spent a couple of years in Montreal, partly participating in the founding of a new monastery there, but while there, completing the necessary, shall we say, coursework and so forth for the PhD from McGill. I came back here to write the dissertation because the sources for my dissertation were all here in Washington, really. So I spent several years back here I was headmaster once again, but I spent at least one day a week trying to work on the research for my dissertation back here. So I did study in Montreal at McGill, and I did have that year at Cambridge, where I did get what they call a diploma in historical studies.
Extraordinary. Then once you came here for your vocational purposes, so to say, you first lived in novitiate, right? Which was in this building at that time.
Well, when I joined the monastery, the Johnson building, as we called it, did not exist. So all we had was this building and the north wing, where I live now. And the north wing had been built in 1942 as a novitiate. But then when the school was opened in 1942, that wing was turned over to the school. So the monks were living exclusively in this wing. So the novices were housed up on the third floor. So my whole, well, practically until the time I was ordained, we lived up on the third floor. Yeah, because everybody was housed here in this building. The Johnson building, as we still call it sometimes, the new building, was opened in around 1963 or 64 or something like that. And I lived over there after I was ordained, but most of the years before that I was living here, and mostly on the third floor.
And how is that for you? I personally live on the second floor right now. I know the third floor isn't quite in use anymore. How was it back then?
Well, the third floor, of course, it wasn't air conditioned, but nothing in this building was air conditioned. And the third, as you can imagine, living on the third floor, right under the roof. In the summer, it was, well, not too strong a thing to say it was almost unbearable, because night and day it was always hot. There was just the one shower and a common bathroom facilities. So we had very small single rooms, obviously, and ventilation was poor, so it was very. It was a trial. I will say that it was a trial. A great benefit to me was actually one Christmas, my grandmother gave me one of those circular fans you sit on the floor, and that was a great boon to my existence to have that. So we never had air conditioning up there. Obviously, there's still no air conditioning up there. So yes, I spent a good bit of time living up there on that third floor, which is not a good place. It's okay for storage, but it wasn't a great place to live.
It is really beautiful, though, I must say. But again, I never lived in it. I just walked through. Right now, we have some sort of painting studio there, I believe.
Well, Father Giles used it. Once nobody was living up there, there was a lot of space. Father Giles, who's no longer with us, he was an artist, and he had his studio up there. So he did most of his artwork up there. And I think maybe Father John does some work up there too, but it was used for things like that, storage and the art studio and things like that, but no one was living there after once the new building opened up.
So after you have successfully completed your novitiate, became a member of this community, at which point did you get ordained?
Well, I had left college and joined the community after 2 years. So after the completion of novitiate and making vows, I did 2 years of study at Catholic University in the School of Philosophy to get a degree, a bachelor's degree in philosophy. And then we began theological studies. There were, I think, 4 or 5 of us studying together. And theology we did here at home. We had our own faculty, mostly made up of monks who already had doctorates. And some of the courses we had to take at Catholic University. So the 4 years of theology were done partly here and partly at Catholic U. I was ordained in 1965 at the shrine. But our theological studies were partly done by our own people here, and sometimes they were also teaching at Catholic University, so we would go over there to take their courses. Mm-hmm. And there were 1 or 2 courses which we didn't have a person for, so we had to take courses at Catholic U. So I did 4 years of theology combined either here or Catholic U.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of your ordination, I know you received a very special gift from your family, right? Your chalice. Could you tell us a few things about it? It's a
in those days, the custom was you always got a chalice when you're ordained. It's not necessary because we have so many chalices. You don't need to add to the collection. But, you know, it was customary. If your parents could in any way afford it, they bought you a chalice, and my parents did. Well, I chose it because I was familiar with this art, with this liturgical artist in Switzerland, whose name escapes me at the moment. And, you know, so he had a catalog, and in those days, the idea of enamel chalices was very popular. No more, you know, enamel over gold, right? And so I chose this chalice, and it's unusual around here because it's a green enamel over gold. So my parents bought that for me, and the story I have associated with that, you may remember the story, is years later I was visiting in Switzerland. I'm visiting this monastery, and the guest master there was somewhat haughty individual, and he was showing me what he called their treasures. And he showed me a couple of chalices had to be designed by this, I want to say this man's name was Meinrad Burke, I think that was his name. And they said these chalices were done by a well-known Swiss liturgical artist. You won't have heard of him. His name was Meinrad Burke. I said, well, actually, he designed a chalice for me also, right? So, which I was happy was able to put him down to some extent. So, yeah, it was a green enamel one, but which were very popular then, but no one has them anymore, you know. You know, anyway, that's the story about the chalice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful art piece, one may say. And I serve at Mass sometimes, so I also know that it's quite on the heavy side,
it's heavy.
But it feels wonderful.
Yeah, it's heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Speaking a little bit more about your priestly duties, so to say, you're an excellent homilist. Everyone knows that. What is maybe not the secret, but the key to your homilies? I know that you can speak for a very long amount of time without any notes, and yet you stay exactly on the subject, almost as if you're reading from a manuscript. How does that work?
I don't have a secret. I don't know it works. When, you know, ever since I was ordained, I've been involved in parish work in some way or another. Because I always thought that being ordained a priest, to some degree, obligated you to do that. Now, we don't have a parish of our own. We don't have a lot of pastoral responsibilities we're responsible for, but almost from the time I was ordained, I would help on weekends in parishes. So I figured out one day, I've helped in 15 different parishes in this archdiocese at one time or another, in DC and in Southern Maryland. I always used to spend, you know, I would relieve pastors in Southern Maryland for 3 or 4 weeks in the summer. And so I've always been involved in that. And never thought of myself as being an extraordinary homilist or something. I just happened. I guess part of being a teacher helps. You know, you have to organize a lecture to some extent. So just did it. I guess I did have a course in homiletics at Catholic University, but as I recall, it wasn't particularly good. So that's just something I picked up, I guess. I don't know. There's no secret to it. But I think being a teacher helps, because it helps you keep more or less focused. But I've enjoyed working in parishes. I've not been responsible for the parish, so I haven't had all the headaches. But being there on weekends, on Sundays at least, and sometimes on the whole weekend, it's been something I've always wanted to coordinate with living the monastic life. And for me, it's worked out as I think 15 different parishes here. And of course, when I was teaching at Andover, I was the chaplain, so I was involved in pastoral. I was the Catholic chaplain. I was involved in on one level pastoral work there. But so I've just always done it. You know.
Wonderful. And you mentioned Southern Maryland before. That's also the place of your, so to say, origins. I know that you also enjoy taking your vacation as leisure, vacational retreats in Southern Maryland. What draws you there? What is the unique sort of aura of that place?
I think it's because it's the Catholic heritage of Maryland in general, but St. Mary's County in particular, and you know, this is where the Maryland colony began, and it began as a Catholic colony. So I've always been interested in the history of particularly St. Mary's County in southern Maryland, and been interested in contact with the parishes there. So that's how I come to be, spend time. I've spent time in Leonardtown and in Great Mills, substituting for pastors. I just like that part of the country, and I like the people down there. And my family has some background down there, so it's just sort of part of my heritage to be concerned about, particularly the Catholic side of Southern Maryland. Yeah, so that's why I'm interested in that, and continue to maintain links with it in one way or another. I haven't helped out I used to go to Leonardtown and substitute for the pastor there, but that was supposed to be part of my vacation. But in that parish, I had not only had the Sunday masses, but the weekend masses. The weekday masses. There was a hospital in the town. There were 2 nursing homes in the town, and so basically, that was my exposure to being a pastor, and it was basically full-time work. So I would say, I like doing this, but it's not exactly a vacation. So I did sort of retire from that a couple of years ago. But Southern Maryland, I'm interested in the history, and particularly the Catholic history, and I just like that part of the world.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to visit there maybe once or twice, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Well,
so serene. And actually it was Father Christopher who took me there as well to show his place of upbringing. Sure does have a lot of history.
I used to actually conduct tours of Southern Maryland for a couple of years in the gala auction. I offered a tour of Southern Maryland, and so I took 2 or 3 times a busload of people down to visit the sites I considered important in Southern Maryland. And I enjoyed doing that, but I haven't done that. We kind of stopped offering that in the auction, so I don't do that anymore. But.
Yeah. Another vocational spot that the Abbey has is the Capon Springs. Do you remember of any particular events there?
I have never spent much time at Capon Springs. There are some people who like it. It's a very nice place. It's there in the mountains, and it's actually quite a nice house that we have there, a sort of hunting lodge type place that we have. We have a little pond that's a man-made pond, which I guess you can swim in. I've never been terribly keen on it. You can do hiking and things like that, but you probably know my aversion from it is primarily has to do with the proximity of snakes, which are quite numerous there, and which have been known to come into the house. So I'm quite willing to let them have it. I don't go. Many people do. Father Christopher loves it. There are other people who like going there. I don't mind it, but there's nothing much to do other than hike, because the pond, you wouldn't want to swim in it anyway, and so it's not as though there's much you can do there other than hiking. So.
Did you experience any snake episodes at the school or at the Abbey as well?
Oh, Well, yeah, one incident in the school. Father Peter used to keep, we used to have 2 snakes in the biology lab. One was a boa constrictor, and one was a standard black snake that you'd see around, in this area. And the black snake was extremely clever, and on more than one occasion found a way of getting out of the cage. And he was harmless, of course, but he was an extensive snake. I remember I was headmaster one afternoon. Quietly, it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was walking from my office up toward the upper wing, and I met the snake coming down. And I remember thinking to myself, this can't be real, it isn't really happening. I'm here in my own school in the middle of the afternoon, and there's a snake coming to me. So the snake was more afraid of me than I of him, so he hid behind the curtain there over the greenhouse window. And I went and got Father Peter, and he came with a net of some kind and got him and put him back in his cage. But he was extremely clever, and he would not only eat his food, but he would have managed to get the food that was being put in for the other snake. And of course the food was live mice. So, yeah, that's my snake story. I never liked going into the lab for when they were there, because just sort of looking at them turned me off. But
speaking of house pets, if I'm not mistaken, you also had a cat at some point.
I've always had a cat. Very unusual as far as the monastery. Well, there have been times here other monks have had cats. At one time there were 2 or 3 cats living here. So I always had, growing up, we tended to have cats. We had a dog too when I was growing up, but it's hard to have a dog in the monastery, but a cat was somewhat manageable. And so I've had a whole series of them, yeah. In fact, my most recent cat only passed away recently but when I came home from my knee surgeries, the cat had been given to Mrs. Stiles to look after. The cat used to spend my vacations with her. When I'd go away, she'd take the cat. So the cat was used to living with her, so the abbot turned the cat over to her. And so I never got it back, but I understand recently she told me the cat had passed away. So I have a whole series of cats. I like dogs, but as I say in the monastery, they're Father Peter and I both started out with fish, right? We'd go to the pet store over in Hyattsville, and then I moved on to gerbils for a while, but then I got the first cat, and never went beyond cats. Well, I did have birds for a while, I think. A couple of, I had a bird cage which Father Peter had designed for me. So I've had different kinds of animals, but cats primarily.
And I heard one of your cats used to make quite an appearance in the cow factory.
Well, one of the cats, I can't remember which one. I think that was Alexandra, I think Alexandra was her name. She was very social, and she loved to participate in gatherings in the cow factory. And if she knew there was a party going on, and she'd hear it because my room was above it, she insisted on being let out, and she would come down and go into the room. And she wasn't interested in the food, or that wasn't her part. She would just move from group to group, like the queen or something visiting. And when she was finished, she would wait at the door to be let out. But she was not at rest until she could actually visit the people downstairs. And, some people have an aversion to cats. So he was not always a welcome visitor, but she never actually bothered anybody. She just wanted to acknowledge their presence and to be acknowledged. So.
Very sweet. So I really enjoy playing the favorites game, so to say. I know it's a little childish, but nevertheless. Would you happen to have any favorite solemnity or a favorite saint? It doesn't really have to be one over another, but perhaps some of the saints that you are really devoted to, or some solemnities that you find of particular meaning to you or your family tradition.
Well, as far as saints are concerned, I've always liked very much St. Francis Xavier. And that's because I grew up in that parish in Southeast, St. Francis Xavier Parish. I went to St. Francis Xavier School, elementary school. And in those days, with the sisters who taught us, I think I knew more about Francis Xavier than members of my own family, actually. So his story, his history, and his missionary work always sort of appealed to me. So he is one of my patrons. In other words, my baptismal name is Thomas Francis because my father's name was Francis. So actually I was named after my father, but I adopted Francis Xavier as the sort of the saint that goes with that. So, as far as solemnities are concerned, obviously, I've always been devoted to Christmas because my father was very devoted to Christmas. And I think perhaps because when he was brought up with mostly being raised by his grandparents, they were Irish from Armagh. They didn't do much with Christmas, I don't think. So once he was an adult and married and had his own family, Christmas was a big thing with him. So I was brought up in that tradition. So the others, this sort of more liturgical solemnities are important, but obviously I was brought up when Christmas was a big deal in my family.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's as far as holidays are concerned. And as far as saints are concerned, obviously Thomas Aquinas is one of my patrons, and Francis Xavier. My confirmation name I took was Patrick, because I wanted to affirm that sort of Irish side of my family. So all those saints I find meaningful, but that's about all I can say about that. I don't think I have any saints to which I have an extraordinary devotion or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the ones whom I sort of appeal to me most of all.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And coming back to the Christmas season, will we be fortunate enough to hearing your homilies during this Christmas season?
No, I don't think so, because midnight mass is always done by the abbot, and the day mass, as we called it, was always done by the prior. So when I was prior, I did it every Christmas, but now I'm not prior anymore, so I won't. I mean, probably sometime during that holiday, it'll be my turn to say the mass and give a homily, but not in a major feast.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you are ever interested in hearing Father Michael's homilies, you can find them in the archive on our website, certainly from previous Christmas masses, but also from any other weekday or weekend mass. So perhaps before we conclude with your maybe mini Christmas address, even though we're not going to hear the homily, would you have any advice to maybe some of the young men who are watching this and are discerning monastic vocation or priesthood? Maybe something from your personal experience or just the way you see it today.
Well, I would say it's important to visit places. It's important to do research on them. I didn't really do that or have to do that because I had been at school here, and the lifestyle of the monks, who were also teachers, at least for the most part, sort of fit what I really wanted to do with my life. But I would think that somebody who's exploring in a broad way should actually visit not just one, but one or two or several monasteries, and do research about the religious orders and so forth. Before I came to St. Anselm's, I had decided I wanted to be a teaching brother, and I had file drawers full of information about the teaching brother orders in this country. And I had settled on the Xaverian brothers, who run Riken in southern Maryland, and then I can't remember the name of the high school they have out in Silver Spring, or did have out in Silver Spring. But they were soliciting my interest greatly, and they wanted me to come to their juniorate after grade school. But my father wisely advised against that, and I was already admitted to St. Anselm's, and so as I spent my time here at St. Anselm's, I got to know monastic life and so forth, which I hadn't known before. But I had done all this research on the religious orders of teaching brothers, so I advise anybody who's thinking of a vocation to actually investigate, to get the literature from, or if possible, to visit other monasteries. I had never actually visited any other monastery except this one. I knew about Portsmouth, which is our sister house and so forth, but I had never been there. So it was only after I was a professed monk of this house that I ever visited another monastery. And I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but I'm just saying I think it was wise for somebody who's starting cold in terms of this to actually do a certain amount of careful investigating and also actual visiting to get to know a place by actually living there for a few days and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And just to wrap this up or conclude, would you have a few words or joyous message to our viewers with upcoming Christmas? It could also just be a blessing if you prefer.
No, I mean, what can you say about, I mean, obviously the central feast of the church year is Easter, connected with the death and resurrection of Jesus. But I think Christmas has a special meaning in the sense that the fact that the Son of God actually entered into human history and was born into our race, into our life, and sort of grew up, experienced everything we experienced, sort of infancy, adolescence, adulthood, work, and ultimately, suffering and death. But that Christmas says that God is part of our story, and I think that's important an important truth always to hold on to, that God is part of our story, which means that we're, in a certain sense, we're also part of His. So
beautiful. Well, thank you for telling us about your story and for finishing with those beautiful words of wisdom and light.
thank you.
Thank you, Father Michael, and thank you for watching yet another episode of interviews with the monks of St. Anselm's. And please stay tuned for the following.